Hi everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are lucky to be joined by Ingrid Leary, who is Labour's spokesperson for mental health and seniors, and also the elected MP for Leary, which was formerly South Dunedin or Dunedin South. Hi there, Ingrid. Welcome to G News.
Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. So there's a lot of talk about raising the eligibility age for superannuation in the media from so-called sensible adults. But the reality is that a lot of those claims appear to be overstated. What's your view on what we're hearing, and how do we compare to other countries, like in the OECD?
I actually think it's a bit of a manufactured narrative that has been put out there to be seen as independent, to allow a political agenda about changing the superannuation age. Labor, of course, has said we won't touch it. Not only is it good for people to have superannuation for dignity, but when you think about it, it's the most efficient way to do targeted support really for seniors. By the time you think about health, travel, housing, all the things that seniors may need in their senior years, if you tried to target that, it would be very inefficient. It's much better to have superannuation, which is like a universal income for seniors, and that affords them the ability to spend the money in the way they know best, and covers all of that, what would have been targeted support.
The case that is made is that we're spending way too much, and that we're going to end up having this ageing population and this great costs in the future. But I've seen reports that if you take into account the Cohen Fund and you just look at, say, what the other countries out there are doing, we're actually not that badly off at all. What's your view on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're kind of at the lower end of the bell curve of other countries. And in fact, we would be even lower if Muldoon hadn't stopped super during those years. We would have had considerably more money and been in a better position like Australia is. It is true that we will have expenses to deal with. There is a challenge, but also an opportunity about having an ageing population. And the opportunity is, how do we have seniors have wonderful lives? People are living longer. That's a great thing. How do they have a fantastic life? And then the challenge, I think, is around healthcare and also housing. But those are things that can be dealt with as healthcare and housing, rather than touching superannuation, which, as I say, Labor won't do.
What's some of the disproportionate harms that would actually occur to vulnerable groups in our society if we were to raise the age of eligibility for super?
Seniors are already struggling with the cost of living. That's what I'm hearing. That's what they're telling me. And so if they were not able to get super until an older age, that's going to make it really difficult for a lot of people. We know that healthcare needs increase with age. We know that it's difficult to get employment, and many people after the age of 65 don't work, although I'm finding that a lot of them are trying to get part-time work now. In fact, I was in a taxi this morning with somebody who said he had to go back to work because he just cannot live on super, him and his wife. They own their own home. So that's the reality. The cost of living is really biting, and if we muck around with super, we're only going to make that worse, and that's going to negatively impact already quite a marginalised group, in my view. Seniors don't really get heard very much, and there's a huge amount of need out there at the moment with housing, for example, particularly for women who have been through marriage breakups, maybe spent time raising kids, have not come out with the same level of savings as husbands, and they're really struggling. And there's an awful lot of women going into that kind of 60s age group who are now couch surfing. The numbers are showing that.
Right, you mentioned before that Labor will not put up the age. So just for everybody that might be quite concerned about what could happen here, what, for the record, is Labor's position on raising the age of eligibility for superannuation?
We won't raise the age at all. We have said that it's for dignity, it's the right thing to do, and we don't need to raise the age. And that's what I say. It's a manufactured narrative, and it makes me suspicious about what the government's agenda is.
Now, could you tell our audience about your retirement village fairer repayments amendment bill and what it aims to do for residents and what the gist of that actually is when it comes to if they get higher levels of care, or say a resident passed away, what happens to their money and what's happening now, and what would that bill do for them?
This is an issue that has been kicked around for a few decades with not a lot of progress, although I have to say Megan Woods got the ball rolling because she could see that reform was needed, and then my other colleague Barbara Edmonds picked it up, and I think we would have had some traction had we won the election. So I'm really picking up where they left off, but there are a number of things that are unfair in retirement villages. My bill focuses specifically on the way that they're funded. So what currently happens is that when you go into a retirement village, you purchase a licence to occupy. You don't actually purchase the capital property. You pay a sum called a capital sum, and it's a little bit like paying all your rent up front and all your bond up front. When you move within the village to a different unit, if you need a higher level of care, or exit the village if you pass away, then the operator can basically hang on to that capital sum until they resell the licence to occupy. In a heated market, that's not so difficult, but when it's a flat market as it currently is, some people are not seeing that money back for months on end, sometimes up to 2 years, and that's causing a lot of anxiety, particularly if they need to move within a village to a higher level of care, or even to another village, for example, to a rest home situation. They have to apply for hardship from the operator rather than being able to automatically get their money back. And that's because the operators are using it to expand their business as a cheap line of credit. Now, that's just wrong. It's been the model and it's enabled us to have a lot of retirement villages, which is a good thing. There is a public benefit to having housing and retirement villages for older people. And the lifestyle is very good, but it's very unfair when it comes to not getting your money back. And it's, in fact, I think one of the only areas in consumer law where that happens.
You mentioned there the idea that we have quite a lot of retirement villages, but the retirement villages themselves have kind of pushed back on this idea and said that they might go out of business and you'd have to close down a few of them because they didn't have the cash to be able to handle this. What do you say to that?
So my bill would give people their 10% of their money back within 5 working days, the rest of it within 3 months. I think that's fair and reasonable. In Australia, they've got a similar law, but get your money back in 6 months. No retirement village in Australia has gone under as a result of that law. So I think that's a spurious claim, and clearly they just want to hang on to their cheap line of credit. The Minister has said he is going to reform this, and due to the pressure that's come about from the Residents Association, but also I think some of the questions we've asked in the House, the government had kind of kicked this into the next term. They've now brought it forward, but they've left the door wide open, and they've said we will look at mandating or incentivising repayments. Incentivising is not going to work, even if there's an interest rate applied, because at the end of the day, you may need that money back for some other purpose, and it's not giving you that freedom of choice. I think the way any normal market would operate would be I would offer you a really good interest rate to the point where you might find that irresistible. But the freedom would still be, the choice would still be in your hands, and currently they're really pushing back on that.
I can recall Sam Uffindale being overheard saying that you were very clever and you'd gone about doing this, and it almost sounded like they were going to copy some of your ideas, but Tam Pūtaka came out and said something else. What was that exactly that he was saying there?
Well, Sam Uffindale said that he thought they should take parts of my bill that were good. That's an interesting comment because my bill, being a member's bill, is very narrow and there's only one part to it really, which is give people their money back. So I take it that he was agreeing with the bill, and I'm delighted that he's been supporting it. I wish he would support it because it's the right thing to do, not just because it's the politically smart thing to do. I think the government are worried about the fallout. There are a huge number of people. There's about 30,000 people, I think, in retirement villages. There's about 11,000 members in the association. But if you look at the whole aged sector of people who are in senior years, That's about 1.7 million New Zealanders. They do vote, they're politically informed and politically active, and I think the government should be worried about that group mobilising. I'm certainly keen to get them mobilised on this.
What's it actually really like for seniors growing older in a cost of living crisis with a government that seems to be ignoring the whole business of intervening and helping anybody with any of the cost of living crisis?
I think it's very worrying for them, and I think one of the areas that we hear the most anxiety about is about health, because of course healthcare and access to affordable healthcare in the community is incredibly important to seniors. I think seniors are worried that we are seeing a deliberate dismantling of the health system and a deliberate move towards privatisation, and the cost of healthcare in the private system when you're a senior, particularly when you get into the 80s, is incredibly high unless you have insurance, and that is also incredibly expensive for people in that cohort. So what I'm hearing is real anxiety from this group about being able to get access to a GP in an affordable way, being able to get into a hospital, not having to wait in an ED department for hours on end. That's what's on their minds.
Let's talk more about healthcare. Let's talk about what's happening to the number of beds available in hospitals and what's going on in your region. What's happening there?
Well, we've got the Dunedin Hospital, which Simeon Brown came down and said with great sort of triumph that the hospital was going to go ahead and that it had been restructured a little, but it was the best of a bad deal due to an alleged blowout of about $3 billion. Now, those numbers did not stack up. But what he failed to do was say that they were making insidious and hidden cuts. So while the hospital had been downsized a little bit, they did not reveal that psychogeriatric beds were going to be removed, and also things like imaging machines. When we have asked about that, Simeon Brown has said, those beds are better off in the community. And he's right, it is not efficient to necessarily always have those beds in hospitals, but there has been no work done under this government to build beds in the community. In fact, when Aisha Verrill was a health minister, she had started that work and had commissioned some research into it to look at what needed to happen. And again, that work got stymied at the election. So this is very worrying for seniors, particularly those with cognitive decline. Many of them cannot live at home, they can't cope at home. Where are they going to go if the beds are not there in the community or in the hospital?
Still on healthcare, you spoke recently in Parliament about how the National Health Plan does not meet the Auditor General's expectations. And you mentioned how this government has left health workers really burned out. So can you comment on how disingenuous Simeon Brown is being around these issues?
Yeah, it's pretty appalling actually, because the health plan doesn't have any real numbers in it. And in fact, last week I asked the chair of the committee, again Sam Uffindale, why the healthcare plan had been taken off the agenda for the health committee to look at. That is a very strange thing to do, and I've got some questions in to see whether he was doing that following orders from any minister, because that would be an absolute breach of parliamentary privilege. I'm not saying that's what happened, but it's such a strange thing to do. And we heard the Auditor General say the health plan was inadequate. We've heard senior doctors say it. And then we have a minister who doesn't offer nurses, any kind of safe staffing levels, and I think a 1% pay increase, and blames them for politicising the health system when they are completely burned out. They were the people in COVID that everybody was applauding and saying these are our critical workers. And it's just appalling to have a minister run down our health clinicians like that. I really just want to acknowledge all the clinicians, all the healthcare workers. They are doing an incredible job in very, very difficult circumstances.
Yeah. Let's talk about mental health. What the overall general picture is. What are you seeing when, we've got all these cuts, we've got pay equity theft, that's what it really is. We've got all the services closing down, and we've got the likes of Gumboot Friday getting a whole bunch of money. So what's your take on all of that?
Look, mental health is in crisis, and what I have seen this government do is what I call probably vanity kind of projects, big shiny magic bullets that don't work. So Gumboot Friday, $24 million. It's good to have counselling available to kids, but the procurement for that was not done in a fair and transparent way. And there are questions about how effective that is as a service because there hasn't been a proper evaluation done, despite any of the numbers that the Minister likes to pull out. We've also got the Mental Health Innovation Fund, again needing co-payment, originally at least $200,000. That's been reduced to $100,000, but there's very few NGOs that have got that money sloshing around in their bank account. And we know that it's some of the smaller providers who are very localised, who really understand their community needs. So that's grossly unfair. And then this week in the House it has transpired a question I did to the Minister that he's paying the health workers that work directly for Health New Zealand, they got an uplift in their budget of 8.15%. But what we call the funded sector or the community groups have only got 3%. I've done a bunch of Official Information Act requests and there doesn't seem to be any rationale for not applying the same uplift to those community groups who are facing the same cost pressures. So again, a real insult to them. We've seen community groups close down, like Here For You, which is an amazing suicide prevention organisation in Gisborne. It won an award on the Friday night that I attended in Gisborne. A week later it had to close its doors because it just didn't have the funding. Now, how that sits alongside some of the other things like the Gumboot Friday funding or the Mental Health Innovation Fund and the type of procurement that's happening there is just very concerning. And I think what needs to happen is that the sector needs to be supported in telling their story. We know they do good work. They shouldn't be asked, to prove their value. What they do need to be able to do is be supported to show their value. The way the government is treating them at the moment, it's as if they don't believe that they provide value, and I think that's an absolute insult. And it's a travesty, actually, because it means people cannot get the care that they need.
So you recently said that the new associate psychology role announced is a red herring which will do nothing to resolve mental health workforce shortages, and it comes with clinical risk. Can you tell us more about what is going on with this role and what those risks are?
It seems to me that that's another one of these magic bullets that the Minister likes to produce. And it's really unfortunate because clinical psychologists do a huge amount of training and work, and they do carry the risk of dealing with people who can have quite fragile mental states. So it's a high risk area anyway. Incidentally, clinical psychologists are in the group who've had their pay equity claims cut in the funded sector. So really what the Minister should be doing, he shouldn't have cut the pay equity claim, and he should be getting that back on the table so we don't have a burned out workforce. Instead, we have now the creation of a 1-year postgraduate course which is going to have these psychologist assistants. They will need supervision by clinical psychologists, and about 800 psychologists wrote to the Minister, that's a fifth of the workforce, and said, Minister, we are not going to supervise these people because they won't have the correct training, and we're so burned out, we don't have the capacity. So already it's going to fail because these people will go through training and then not be able to get the supervision they need. The clinical risk is that if there is the continued pressure on the health system, we may find that people will be pushed into positions where they are not supervised adequately, and that's where the risk is, and that's really worrying.
It really sounds like a schmozzle to me, the whole pay equity thing. They say, well, you can always make a claim, but what's the reality there, Ingrid?
Yeah, they've made it impossible to make a claim. And I just read a letter from one of the big community providers the other day who said that it's been set up so that it's kind of a circular thing where the health officials hold all the cards at the direction of the Minister, and it's just impossible to make a claim. Many of them can't claim till at least 2030. The result of that is that we are seeing a lot of our workforce go to Australia. They have shortages in aged care. They have shortages in what we call the allied workforce and care and support work. They are already getting people over from Malaysia, Singapore and Fiji, and now New Zealand as well, and they still don't have enough for their workforce. And they have paid their workforce a 30% increase over the last 3 years. Meanwhile, our aged care allied workforce are on almost minimum wage and very little prospect of being able to work through the steps. Their pay equity claim has been cut. Why wouldn't you go to Australia?
Mm-hmm. Finally, what are the big issues facing Leary, and what really needs to be done about those issues?
Yeah, look, Leary's a wonderfully diverse electorate, and so the issues that we see in South Dunedin can be quite different from the stretches in Clutha, which involve farmland, or over to Middlemarch. One thing that the whole electorate really has in common, though, is it's prone to flooding. South Dunedin is the worst, I guess, and we've seen that in 2015 and then in subsequent years, and even recently, still some of the streets there, we've seen houses underwater. But also actually on the Leary Plains, some of the farms there get flooded, and right down to Clutha, which was cut off in the last floods a few months ago. So we really need some urgent action on climate change, which appears to have dropped off the narrative, particularly with this government, where we're not going to see New Zealand reach its climate targets, but also climate mitigation. And I worked really hard with previous colleagues to be able to get into the climate manifesto that Labor had a specific reference to South Dunedin. There was a political will to do something to support, because we need to allow the housing to follow the natural landscape, but also there needs to be some strategic things done with some of the areas there that could maybe assist with the flood mitigation. So I'm very keen to see that. The other thing is, of course, the same thing that everybody else is struggling with, which is cost of living, with housing, with health and with jobs. We're seeing unemployment rise, really a worry for our young people. So I can't wait to get back into government so we can sort that out.
Good stuff. Thank you very much for joining us today, Ingrid. It's been really good to talk to you and very informing for us all. And hopefully we can have you back again on our path to changing this government and making it a one-term government.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Welcome to G News, the good news.